when we were recording this, but of course, whenever you find this material is exactly the right place and time for you. So I believe that because you are here, there is a message in this monad family meeting transmission for you. So my name is Sitara. For those of you who are just joining, I'm ranked top 5 female psychic medium in the US. And what I want to bring to you today is a topic of cleansing and purging, cleansing and releasing. So we've started our Rise program, as you've heard me talk about. Doors are still open, of course. But what we want to really clear and cleanse out is our own energy field, the clutter in our space, maybe past relationships that are still bothering, or past endings that are still kind of taking up space in our energy field. Okay, it's hard to hear me. Let me go ahead and see if I can do something about the sound really quick. Do do do. All right, thanks for bearing with me here. It's working for Cool Deep, okay. If it's hard to hear, maybe go ahead and try adjusting your system, turning your. Had some people mention that to me before, so maybe having this microphone helps. It's just so not pretty to just have that right there. I'm all about aesthetics sometimes. All right. So as we're talking about clearing and cleansing, we're talking about getting rid of and moving energy so that we have room to bring stuff in. So, okay, good. Glad it's better. Thanks, team. Thanks for helping me get the sound together. All right. So what I want you to think about, let's go ahead and just kind of take a moment. If you have a journal, of course, that's going to help. But what I want to take a moment to think about and dive into is if you could write a list. Just write out a list of the things in your life that have taken place that still bother you. Yep. We're going to go into the storage unit. We're going to do some clearing and cleansing. Hi, welcome, William. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. So, as you go into the storage closet and you're writing down the list of events or circumstances that are still affecting you, because they say that time heals all wounds, but I actually don't subscribe to that. I believe that time heals properly cleaned and dressed wounds. So if we don't go into a circumstance that has taken place and clear and clean it out, coming through and rearranging how we associate to it, it can be extremely disruptive to what we're doing for future, for what we're doing for ourselves moving forward. So when we go into that storage unit and we make the list, to ignore the hair situation, you go in, you make the list, you get clear with what is important to you. So these circumstances or these things that bother you, you want to ask yourself a really honest and rigorous why. What is the thing that you're holding on to? And it could be the most obvious thing, or it could be like a subtle internal trigger. And that's what we want to find. We want to find that trigger point, because that trigger is what is going to give you the freedom. So it isn't about blaming. It isn't about projecting. It isn't about saying, well, this happened, so this is why this is going on in my life. We want to get really clear with what is going on in our own inner world. And our own inner world is going to show us exactly how to move through it when we are willing to, like I said, be honest with ourselves. Now, I have a program that's called Release and Rise.
And Release and Rise, it's actually designed for really intense experiences of trauma, of either sexual assault, abuse, or deep betrayal. And so, of course, when something is designed to go that deep, the, let's say, maybe if trauma is a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the worst, the things that are ranging at a 5, they just fall and melt away. So the process of being able to go into, because healing can be very messy, healing can be very time consuming, healing can be very emotionally disruptive, and a lot of people think that, you know, it's all sunshine and roses, especially when you get to that point of awakening. But in order to dismantle some of the things that we have built in our subconscious, what happens is a domino effect or a chain reaction of the things that are going on above that basically foundation. So if the foundation has a, let's say, a broken brick or a rotted piece of wood or something going on there, and you have to go in and release it and remove it by self-nurturing or inner child work, or going in and reprogramming. Okay, William, you've been wrestling with a stubborn entity pretty all day, every day, but you can't get it out of my energy field. It's very frustrating. I hear you. I've been there. Thank you for your awareness. The fact that you're able to pay attention to that is very, it's a beautiful thing. I'm not going to do it on this video, but I have several videos where we actually do entity releases in the video. I know that two of them, there are 2-hour-long videos that I did when I was in Bali, that clear out entities. They were extremely powerful. The feedback that I got from them was beautiful. That's what I love about these recordings. So what I'm going to do is encourage you to go through the playlist, and let your intuition guide you, because your intuition will lead you to the one that you need to see. Now, on this topic, because it's been brought into the fields and because of exactly what we're talking about now, and my 13 plus, when did I started doing entity removals when I was about 22 years old, was when I first started learning how to do it, and have done it not on an everyday basis, thank God, because it's not super fun. But I've been doing it on a regular basis since, which is about 12, 13 years. So the entity thing, let's talk about this, because clearing out the storage unit is directly connected to this. So what I have learned is that 99 times out of 100, the entity the consciousness. Let me back up and talk about what an entity is. Okay. So an entity is an external consciousness, a spirit without a body that has hosted on a human being, and the human being on some frequency point has a match with the entity. That's how the entity gets in. That's how the entity is able to attach. So, what I have learned, instead of going in and doing this dramatic exorcism and all this stuff, which I've also been a part of and know how to do and have done for myself, unfortunately, which is why I do not drink alcohol, and I encourage every single human being that I talk to not to drink it, not from a place of judgment, but from a place of unconscious understanding of what you're allowing into your field and into your body when you are going in and out and you're absent. I have a video here on YouTube called Drunk Spirituality. I highly recommend you to watch it if you are a drinker, trying to get away from drinking, all this stuff. When you learn about the spiritual implications that drinking has, it might encourage you to reconsider these choices. So, the entity. The entity is an external consciousness. It can be considered parasitic because it hosts on the human being. And the thing is that it hosts on the human being at that frequency match. So if the frequency match is chaos, is rage, is destruction, is self-worthlessness, if it comes from a point of trauma, of abuse, or sexual assault, because when you're also in these points of uh, being the victim, and I'm not talking about victim mindset or victim mentality. I'm talking like if you are actually in a situation or a circumstance where you are being abused physically, emotionally, energetically, if you are being attacked in some way, shape, or form, it is important that you gain your power back. But let's say this happened like before the age of 10. So it leaves an imprint. And this imprint is occurred or leaves a mark from also in the person who is creating that kind of challenge or that kind of abuse is not acting as their best self. They're acting actually in like their darkest moments. So the darkest moments that's going on in this place leaves an imprint on the human being that's receiving the abuse. In this circumstance, the victim, right? Now, when we look at this point, there is, and this is what happens. I'm going deep and I'm going on all sorts of tangents, and just buckle up because I'm going to go through and actually explain this all very thoroughly. Decided. Um, so I got a degree in psychology when I was in my early 20s, when you go to college. The reason I am not a psychologist, the reason I decided not to get my master's and not to become a counselor, was for several reasons. One of them was that I didn't like the rules of the American Psychological Association and the rules that they put on psychologists of what they could and couldn't do. The other thing is that I didn't like that psychology only focuses on mind and body. And mind and body it completely leaves out spirituality, the spirit makeup of the mind body spirit composition, and it also leaves out anything that is not measurable by technology. If we cannot measure it by technology, then according to psychology, it is not a reliable source of information to help a human being heal. This to me made no sense. Even in my early 20s, I was like, you've got to be kidding me. Here's an example. You love your pet. You love your mom. You love your siblings. You love your children. You love your dad. You love people in your life. You love people that you've just met. And you don't know how that love is there, right? But you know that it exists. You know that you can experience heartbreak when something changes or something shifts. So, by means of these experiences, if you don't have a tool to measure it, does it mean that love does not exist? You can't say, well, I love my dad, waiting for the measurement. How are you going to measure it? How are you going to say that that's what that is? How are you going to say that love doesn't exist because you can't measure it? So for me, that's where I had a few problems with the way that psychology was focusing on healing. Now, here's the other one. This is why I'm going to talk about entities. Dissociative identity disorder, also known as multiple personality disorder, narcissism, and schizophrenia. Let's just talk about those three. Multiple personality disorder is when a human being has multiple personalities, not just meaning that they have different moods, they have different personalities. Now, the extent to which this occurs is that these different personalities that go into these human beings actually have physiological changes in the body, meaning that there are some personalities that will need and are required to wear glasses, and other personalities in the same human being do not wear glasses. It will change the woman's cycle. So the physiological differences of these personalities. So I'm there in psychology class going, okay, this is really interesting. We're learning about fugue states. We're learning about all sorts of stuff. And I'm just going to, like I said, focus on these three. So the other thing about multiple personality disorder is that in the cases that we were learning about, every single one had an extreme moment of trauma before the age of 5 years old. So when that occurs, and now I'm speaking from my spiritual standpoint of being able to read energy and see spirits in this thing. When that occurs, there is the presence of other beings in the room or in the space or in the circumstance. So what will happen is a guardian or a guide will pop into the body of the person who's being abused or molested or assaulted. That being will take the brunt of the abuse. The being will receive that abuse from the perpetrator, which is different than the soul that incarnated into the human body, right? So, what takes place then after the moment of abuse is happening is that there's a fracture in the human's spirit. So the fracture, and we hear about aura holes and that sort of thing. This is like a fault line that happens in the spirit, where then the body is then being shared with multiple personalities or multiple spirits. This is different than having an entity, by the way. This is far different, but I'm going to continue to explain this. So, schizophrenia. Schizophrenia, the psychological answer for it is put them on lithium and put them in a home. That's it. Maybe have conversations with them. I don't agree with this at all. To me, schizophrenia is a spiritual disease. It's a spiritual disease as in dis-ease, or it's a spiritual disorder. So if we are not looking at this from people hearing voices that don't exist, these voices do exist. They don't exist in the third dimension. They exist in the fifth dimension. They exist in the world of energy that we're living in. And so psychologists completely refuse, and I don't want to say all psychologists because some are more open-minded, but I'll say the practice and the doctrine of psychology leaves that out as a way to not really address the core root of the problem or the circumstance. So schizophrenia is a bombardment of other sort of spirits that are getting in the field of the human being that is hosted in the body. But the human being then has an opening to connect with these things, but also because there's not support to being able to address these from a means of what is actually going on at the core problem, then the person also thinks they're losing their mind and they also think they're going crazy. And then they have all sorts of self-worthlessness and the psyche starts to tumble into a field of low vibration. And then they're put on medication, and the medication numbs different synapses that doesn't actually allow them to hear, but it's like taking Tylenol in the sense that you take Tylenol and it just cuts your brain off from feeling the pain. It doesn't mean that the pain isn't there in the body. The body is still trying to communicate to you through the pain synapses that are firing, saying something is off, something is wrong. And so we numb and we dissociate and we turn away. This is part of the chronic illness that plagues our society. Instead of addressing when there is pain, instead of addressing when there is discomfort, and instead of addressing more of the core emotional issues of what is going on inside a human being. Now, narcissism, and I'm going to go over this quickly, but I think it's also important. Narcissism, as I have learned by having close relationships with many narcissists, having my own, I have a primary caregiver that is textbook narcissist. So I believe that people learn narcissism by means of survival. So when I was going to school and looking, learning the DSM and all of these things, I had to address my own narcissistic traits and go from the inside out and go, okay, what is actually going on here with me? If I'm having these symptoms that I'm reading about, or I'm checking into these things and looking at them. Now, I do believe that there's a spectrum of narcissism. I really do. I don't think that it's either you are a full-blown narcissist or you're just or nothing. There is some gray area here with it. And what I want to say to it is that it comes from a very deep wounded place. Narcissism is an overdevelopment of the ego structure. Now, the overdevelopment of the ego structure, and the reason I'm doing this around my head is because it comes from a place where it comes off as arrogance, it comes off as selfishness, it comes off as self-centeredness, it comes off as not thinking about anybody or the world around you. And it's because the development of the ego structure has become so fortified and so strong from a point of trauma that happens again, we're talking early years, either before the age of 5 or before the age of 10. The younger, usually the more developed the narcissism is. So these walls, this egoic structure becomes so fortified that the person literally cannot see another person's perspective. They cannot see from the outside in. Whereas empaths are almost hypersensitive. They're hypersensitive in the sense that they can feel the field around them so strongly, and they're so kind of concerned with everybody else's energy. And they're concerned with everybody else's energy because they too have experienced a point of trauma or maybe ongoing consistent trauma with a primary caregiver in which they had to be hypersensitive to the field around them. So, this is why there's a narcissist empath magnetism. So, if you had a primary caregiver that was a narcissist, chances are you are a highly sensitive person, you are an empath, and chances are you might have some narcissistic traits based on learned behavior to survive in that environment, and that you're going to attract narcissistic partnerships to help you learn to unravel these experiences or places where there was a lack of boundaries. So, multiple personality disorder. I want to reiterate with this that there is a physiological difference in the body. Do you know what this means? If there is a physiological difference in the body, meaning one personality needs to wear glasses and another personality cannot see with these glasses on, and the change happens in a snap of a finger. Do you know what that means as far as our capabilities to heal ourselves? I started to muse on this before I even started developing the understanding of my own psyche came after. So, when we talk about entity, when we talk about an entity that's plugged into a person, that's hosting on them as a parasite, there is a point, an access point, a focal point, a frequency match, a plug, in which this entity plugs into the person from a fifth dimensional standpoint, right? It's obviously not plugged into the physical body. Now, granted, you might have a point in the physical body where you have, I don't know, a recurring bruise, like something, maybe a mole that's kind of funky. I don't know. The physical body might show you as to point of where it's plugged into, but that's not even necessarily, yes, that will help. But what we want to look at is the access point. How is the entity plugged in? Because the entity actually doesn't host without an agreement of the person that's hosting. So on some level, the person that has the entity let that entity in, either by means of asking for help from a low point, either by means of acknowledging on a bigger picture that the removal of this entity will actually create a fortification in the strength of the boundaries and the energetic and emotional responsibility of the person that has the entity. So it actually becomes a point of strength training. So if you can see the entity as something that's actually helping you to become a master of your own energy, you will actually become a master of your own energy. You actually will be able to release it. Now, sometimes entities use emotional manipulation. You start talking to them, they will start shifting and changing some of the emotions of how you connect with them. They might go kicking and screaming. They might threaten. They'll have, like, I've seen the plethora of it. When you start talking to an entity or releasing an entity or moving an entity, all of that is all surface level. Like, don't get bombarded or manipulated by this. At the bottom line, the baseline, we are all walking ourselves home. We are all returning to the light, including parasitic entities. So, when you're connecting with this point inside of yourself and you're healing this point inside of yourself, And I'll also say that I have a little bit of a theory on this. I'm just thinking how to word this, and I'm having a little bit of a deja vu at the same time. From working with enough of these entities and enough of these people and talking to enough people who have talked to me about having these experiences, I'm actually also not completely convinced that this is like an entity situation that comes from something else. There's a part of me that also believes, and it can be like 6 to 1, half dozen to the other. So it's like same coin, different side. Is that the entity itself is a manifestation of the wound inside of the individual that we'll say is hosting. So it's a subconscious manifestation of that wound trying to get attention to heal. And that's oftentimes like if you're doing the inner work and you're healing that point, that access point in which the entity has plugged into, or to word it differently, has manifested out of, then the relationship with that form completely shifts, completely changes. Is this resonating? Are you guys picking up what I'm putting down? And here's the other point in which it doesn't necessarily matter one way or the other if it is something external or if it is something internal. The way that you heal it is the same. So it doesn't necessarily matter how you look at it. You can look at it, the entity, as a part of yourself that's calling for healing. And if we look at the oneness of all that is, that we are all one, then that is extremely true. And either way, the best way that I have ever learned to take care of these circumstances or problems, which is not the way I was taught. I was taught that you go in there and you threaten them and you have to pull it out and it has to be super dramatic and everybody's angry and loud. It's crazy. That's the way I was taught, which is why I do not teach the methods I was taught. When I teach psychic development, it is far different and it is from a place of healing, an internal acknowledgement of your own gifts, which of course is what we go in much deeper in my live ongoing programs, especially with Rise. But the bottom line, to just give you some kind of encouragement, is that when you come to it from a place of compassion, and when you come to the wound with a place of love, and when you come to the wound or the access point with a place of compassion and a desire, a deeply rooted desire to become more whole in your own self, these patterns will change. Okay, William, this is truth. I took psychology in college too, and it's terrible modality of healing. They never get better. It only manages symptoms and allows the entity. Yes. Yes. William, thank you so much for your presence, and thank you so much for this inquiry, because you pulled a whole lot of information out of me today that felt very important to share. This one actually felt very important, and these are things that I've talked about so many times, but never on camera, or never in this way on YouTube, I'll say that. So yes, what I would encourage you to do with the entity is find the video. Like I said, there are videos that I have on here that actually walk you through the entity removal. Maybe even if you just search Sitara Fae entity, see what videos come up, but also use your intuition, because not all of them are labeled in that way with what's in the video, especially the hour-long ones. I go through so many different topics that it's important to just listen. So thank you all so much for your presence. I'm sure that this has turned over a few stones for you to look at circumstances or things a little bit differently in your own world, in your own life, to see how powerful you truly are in your own presence, in your own well-being, that you are capable of healing and reconciling and moving through any circumstances or any things that have ever happened to you or for you in your life. 100%. 100%. So, with our course Rise, of course, you are welcome. You are encouraged to join. We are developing our psychic abilities, holding ourselves accountable for our growth, re redeveloping our ability to make money, to create money, to become wildly prosperous, with a group of like minded and like hearted people that are here to grow, that are here to expand, that are here to become better versions of themselves, and to harness and master their energy, or for you to harness and master your energy. So if that feels like something that resonates for you, of course, DM me Rise on Instagram at sitara.speaks. You can find me there. Like I said, just DM the word Rise. It'll start a chat conversation to gather a little bit of information from you and share some information about the program. So thank you so much for your presence again, again, again. Thank you so much for your heart. Thank you for all your likes, your comments, your shares. Thank you for subscribing and hitting that bell so that you get notified every weekday morning at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time so that you can meet me here live for our morning chats. So, with that, my sweet loves, of course, remember Christmas is coming up. We have thank you. Yes, William, this is just the beginning. We're planting more seeds. But for Christmas, of course, feel free to check out Monad Designs. This is one of the pint glasses that you can find, one of my favorites. We've got candles as well, all sorts of goodies in there, hoodies, kimonos, with the Monad design on there. So I love you. I adore you. Thank you for your presence, your willingness to be open, to expand your field of awareness. And with that, my sweet loves, I will see you again tomorrow. If you're curious about Rise, let me know, and I will chat with you very soon. Mwah. Have an absolutely blessed